Hello students, welcome back to our course on visual semantics or semiotics for visual communication. So, in our last class we looked into signs and the different relationship between signs, object and the interpretant, and based on that we are making lot of meaning or we are making a fruitful communication through that. Today we will look at one very important aspect of visual perception and which is very deeply related to cognitives and psychology, and that decides or that is a deciding factor for our visual arrangement. That is how we perceive and make meaning based on certain logic. So, that is called the Gestalt principle of perception. So, today we will talk about the Gestalt school of psychology or Gestaltism. It is known by various nomenclature, but basically and Gestalts was a group of people or group of scientists, psychologists, all of them coming together and then proposing a law or some kind of principles related to psychology or the way we perceive, or grouping all of it together, and based on that we heavily, the designers, communicators heavily bank on Gestaltism, and there are established laws for our various needs, for our communicational needs. So, if we look at how it all evolved, so Gestalt psychology or Gestaltism originated from a German word. So, Gestalts is a origin, it has its origin in the German word, and which is related to shape or form. So, when during inception people started looking at various shapes and forms, so visual shapes and visual forms, and they were looking at how this evolved and what kind of relationship they had. So, that was the starting point of Gestaltism or Gestalt psychology for that matter, and the scientists that time realized that there are particular order or particular pattern which works in the background of seeing the forms, of seeing the shapes together, and that is how the term evolved, and then later on it took lot of concrete shape and lot of new theories came into picture, and this was a philosophy. So, it started as a philosophy related to mind and its behavior, and this was developed in Berlin School of Experimental Psychology. So, there people were looking at how the minds work and how the minds behave and observe basically these shapes and forms, and that is how it started evolving as I discussed. So, that has the basis of Gestaltism, and the laws which are related to Gestaltism is used for acquiring and maintaining meaningful perception of apparently complex world or environment around us. So, basically around us we are experiencing the world, we are experiencing lot of objects through our eyes, through various other senses, we are experiencing these things, and it is very complex. As you can understand, vision alone is such a complex domain to understand. The light stimuli which is getting reflected on the environment, falling into our eyes, getting absorbed by the retina and then processing it. So, it is taking up all sort of signals which are possible, all that is visually there in your visual field. So, this is which we call field of vision. Whatever is there, you are, everything is getting registered in your eyes, but then how do you acquire meaningful information? How do you maintain getting this information and then take certain decisions? Every moment we are taking some decision based on our perception, be it any senses. 80% is visual senses that we encounter, and based on that we are taking we are perceiving that and taking some kind of decision, doing some action and things like that. We are learning things, we are recognizing things, we are doing things based on all that. But then the question comes, how do we acquire it? What is the science, what is the law related to it? What is which is happening at the background in the mind? So, it is a very interesting facet of human mind which we are trying to deep dive today and understand why a mind looks at certain things in a particular way, or at least understand these patterns. So, that is exactly what the Gestalt's law is doing, and in principle it is very, very simple. Why it is happening and how it is happening, principally that is very simple, and I will tell you the logic of this. The logic of this is human mind wants to achieve maximum efficiency. So, you want to do less of work over here. So, you do not want to spend too much time, you do not want to spend too much of energy in your brain, and you want to take the decision bang. You want to arrive at the task to be done quickly. That is all what we as living organisms is trying to do, and more so with intelligent creature as human beings. And in order to do that, what do we rely on? We rely on certain patterns. So, this is how we are relying on our environment. So, we look at the environment. First time you are looking at the environment, you will spend a lot of time in understanding its syntax, in making meaning, in understanding that particular sign, how it is matching with the object, and then you make a meaning out of it. So, you will first timers, you will take a lot of time doing this. So, this is what is called a cognitive process. You are learning that thing. So, you are spending time on syntax, you are spending time on semantics, and then you have seen that you being used over course of time. So, you have used one particular, say a toilet signage, you have used it once, you have seen it in an airport, you have seen it again somewhere else. So, next time you see that particular image, your mind will not spend even a millisecond further in trying to look at the syntax, look at the meaning and things like that. It will immediately look at the pattern and take a decision. That is a toilet, and that is how it is to be used, and you take a decision based on that. So, what is happening here is you are recognizing that pattern and you do not spend further time. So, that is the principle which is happening at the background. And how is that principle happening? That principle is happening with the concept that you look at things overall. Okay. So, this is called the top down and bottom up approach in perception. So, there are two different types of visual perception, process of visual perception. So, there are two processes of visual perception. So, these two processes are, first one is called the bottom up process and the other one is called the top down process. So, as the name suggests, there is bottom up and there is top down. So, what is happening in a bottom up process is the light is reflecting from the environment and object around us, it is falling into our retina and you are analyzing each and every stimuli that is falling into your retina. So, this is the bottom up process, small bits and pieces coming, you are gathering those information and hence you are trying to understand the meaning and doing that process. So, it is going by the syntax, semantics and pragmatics mode. So, you have seen, say for example, again take the toilet signage, you looked at the syntax, you looked at all the form and everything, first time you looked at that image, then you understood the meaning, you made association with the object and made meaning out of it, and then you see okay, every time you see this signage, it is not just representing a man or a woman, but it is related to a toilet or a particular usage for a particular gender. So, it is something which you actually experienced, used, and hence you know the implications of that. So, that creates the entire understanding of semiotic, or the semiotic landscape is complete over here. Okay. So, this is how which is happening all the time, but this is the bottom up process. First time you see, the bottom up process worked, but there is another process which is working in action, and that is the top down process, where your surrounding environment, your intentions, your aspirations, your experience also play a very, very important role. Say for example, now you see this same image in an airport or a railway station, you just will not spend even a millisecond to go through this process, because this is something which is part and parcel of your expectations, experience and things like that. You know that this is very obvious thing to be present in a railway station, but imagine you see this kind of a signage in an open air or in a jungle or in some other places which is not very familiar, where you see this kind of signage. Probably you will spend a little bit more of extra time on this, or maybe the syntax is very different, the object drawn, the representation is very different. Probably you will spend some more time using your experience. Maybe this particular image which is there on the toilet, you are watching this image in a particular culture, say in Turkey. Okay, in Turkey, in a Middle Eastern country, this is being represented, the syntax is very different, and you will spend some extra time to understand through your experiences where you are, how you are. So, this is the top down process which is taking place. So, all of it together gives an understanding of the Gestalt psychology which is happening at the background. So, if we look at, I have tried to put it together in terms of some bullet points. So, here human mind perceives through simplification and less effort, that is what we talked about. So, human mind always wants to do less of work, put less of effort and make a system efficient. So, this is what is the domain of that, and then mind understands, sorry there should be a gap over here. So, mind understands external stimuli as a whole rather than some of their parts. So, when I talked about the bottom up process and the top down process, they both are working together. So, at an instant the stimuli is falling into your eye, but then you are looking at it as a whole, you are looking at it as a pattern, and you make a decision rather than you are looking at all different parts and then taking a decision what it is. So, basically many a times we are trying to look at whole as a pattern and try to understand, make meaning, take some judgment, take some decisions based on that. And the overall pattern is subjected to a quick consumption. So, this is something we are looking at, that we try to consume this overall pattern rather than some of smaller patterns. So, you are trying to consume the whole thing at once, make a meaning rather than assuming its smaller parts. Many a times we do that when we see something very unfamiliar or seeing it for the first time, we tend to do that, but not always. So, now let us come to the 6 laws or principles according to Gestalt psychology for the perception or grouping of things. So, we will talk of each of the 6 laws one by one. So, if we look at the 6 laws, so these are the 6 laws we will talk about. So, the first one I will just read it out right now, but we will look at each of them in separation. So, one is the law of proximity, the law of similarity, law of closure, law of symmetry, law of continuity, and law of common fate. So, we will go by one for this. So, the first one we encountered is called the law of proximity. So, the law of proximity, what it suggests is that in your visual frame, if you have things in proximity, you tend to see them as one object. So, I am drawing some kind of things on your visual field. So, let me draw some of these things, then you will understand how it works. So, if we look at this particular visual field now, what we did is we have certain objects, we have some elements. So, in terms of semantics, syntax, we have lot of elements and we have arranged those elements over here, and this arrangement has a particular order. You can see that they are in close proximity, and the things which are in close proximity, now when you look at this, how are you looking at this? You are bunching it together. See, you are looking at this as one element, you are looking at this as another element, this. So, this is exactly how you have looked at the entire visual field. So, what essentially it means is that when you have various elements coming together like this, the law of proximity is driving you to bunch it together. You are not looking at its parts. You have, if I now ask you how many stars did you see, how many elements did you see when I did this grouping, you won't be able to relate. But if I say how many things, how many regions you have seen, you would be able to say I have seen 4 or 5 regions, and there was one element which was separated out. Why is that happening? It is happening owing to this law of proximity. So, what the mind does it, as soon as I look into the visual fabric, it will immediately try to bunch things which are in proximity. So, which is a very, very important aspect for visual design, for visual communication. When you have a blank canvas in front of you, how you are proximizing the thing. So, things you are putting in close proximity will tend to become one thing, and other things tend to become other things. So, if we look at this canvas in particular, this becomes one thing, this becomes another thing, this another, and this another. So, if say for example, you have a connection between these, you can't, if you want people to look at them together or have some kind of connection between two, law of proximity will stop you from doing this. So, in that case what you have to do is you have to bring these two chunks together, and then maybe this is one element and these two chunks together. So, owing to your design, if say if I term this 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, according to your communicational need, if I want 1 and 2 to be seen together, they has to be brought in proximity. Only then I will see them together. Otherwise, I will tend to see 1, then 3, then 2, then 4 and then 5. So, again if 4 and 5 has to be looked together, they has to be brought in proximity. So, proxemics play a very, very important role when you are designing. This is one example I can show you, is when you are looking at a website, how different chunks of information are placed in proximity. So, if you have a chunk of information here and a chunk of information which is not in proximity, but you want people to look at it together, there will be a difference. That is how menus are bunched, the navigation tools are bunched together, so that they are in proximity and you know one step by step what needs to be done. So, these are some practical examples where you use this, but fundamentally this is what law of proximity does. Now, we come to something which is known as law of similarity. So, as the name suggests, the law of similarity is based on, say we again have a canvas over here and we start putting the elements over here. I will take a different color, and now you are seeing that I am putting lot of different shapes, and we have drawn certain objects or elements over here. So, in proximity we saw that things which are in proximity, we try to bunch them together. So, that law is working, but here how are you grouping these objects? So, if you look carefully, you will immediately start grouping objects which have similarity, similarity owing to shape, similarity owing to orientation, or similarity by many other factors. You start grouping them. So, one is the proximity which plays into picture, but at the same time you tend to visually bunch them together and you look at them together. So, this is called law of similarity, and that is achieved by various means. So, here comes your knowledge of elements of design, where you look at colors, texture, rhythm, pattern. So, the similarity could be based on many aspects of design, but the idea, the key concept that you should keep in mind is the similar objects which is there in your viewing field or field of vision, people will tend to look at them together. So, this particular concept or aspect is again used in many of the web applications. Just to give you an example, where you put many elements, similar elements, or you connect them with color. Say you have a navigation tool at the top and the left, or at the top and the bottom, you have similarity of color, which creates the similarity between these navigational aspects. So, this is how many a times, apart from proximity, where you cannot provide proximity owing to certain reasons of your design, you bring this concept of similarity and people will tend to look at it together. So, many a times that you are designing, we heavily bank on the proximity and the similarity, and there is a very very important aspect, do not bring too many elements together. Then what happens is, if you look at this element, if I bring in too many elements together, the mind get puzzled and it no longer can create these wholes. So, we talked about we tend to look at whole rather than summing up the parts. So, the mind will have difficulty in perceiving this and creating as a whole and then decoding it. So, that will go against, that will increase his semantic differences or the gap, it will increase the effort on the mind, and hence this kind of problem will take place. So, now we look at the third law, which is the law of closure, which is pretty much simple to understand, which is a very very important aspect of human mind, where we assume, if you remember in our very first class we talked about assumption as a core to human communication, we assume lot of things. So, many a times when a particular form is not complete, incomplete, but we close it, our mind tends to close it up and then look at it as a whole. To give you an example, a classic example, in many of the cases you will see that I am just showing you one example over here. So, I have drawn some object and I am coloring it up. So, I am like making it black in color. So, what do you see over here? So, if I show you this now, what do you see? You are seeing this particular object, even if I have not drawn it. What I have drawn is 1, 2 and 3. I have drawn something which is a different object altogether, but our mind does the other part. So, this is a very very interesting law which works in our mind and which also supports the concept of we tend to look at parts, we tend to do a top down approach, process of vision also apart from the bottom up vision. So, here you are looking at, if the stimuli wise we look at, we would have just seen 3 pizza chunk, 3 circles which are eaten up, had it been only bottom up process. But now we are utilizing our past experiences, our expectations and things like that. We know how a triangle is and our mind is closing this. So, our mind is closing a thing which we have not even drawn, and this is happening all the time based on our visual assumptions. So, this is also another principle or law which we use when we are doing a visual design. Many a times we do not complete everything, we keep certain things open and interpretation or closure by the interpretant or the observer. So, we use that, and this is also happening in our visual domain. Now, we come to the next law, which says the law of symmetry. So, we have talked about symmetry when we were talking about principles of design. So, symmetry is something where we have an axis and we are balancing it, it is like a mirror thing. So, you have a hypothetical axis, and if you have something here, you have another object here which is balancing it. So, this is a symmetrical form that we talked about, and the law is pretty much simple to understand. So, in our visual domain, if we have some object, say if we do this, immediately our mind will create a virtual axis and start looking at it in terms of symmetry. So, we tend to find out, search out symmetry in an object. So, in a visual representation. Say for example, many a times when we ask you to look into cloud or look into a pattern, many a time you observe a face or an animal or things like that. So, why is that happening? Because you are trying to find out a balance between the patterns that you are seeing. So, you are trying to draw an axis, you will imagine this to be one eye, this to be a nose or something else, and you are bunching it together and seeing it as a whole. So, if I use this and this, this and this and this, you will definitely look at it as a symmetrical combination, and you start putting it together and looking at it as a whole, and hence decipher this particular or make interpretation of this particular visual. So, this is what is called the law of symmetry. So, you are searching for symmetry, and a mismatch of symmetry, if you can't search the symmetry, you get disturbed. Many of the visual artists and visual designers intentionally create this lack of harmony or lack of symmetry to create tension, for users to spend more attention to your artwork or your visual design. There you tend to spend more time in understanding the asymmetry rather than trying to understand the symmetry at one go. So, many a times these laws are used in support or in what you say in clash with each other to create certain desired effect. Now, we talk about the last two laws in continuation to this. So, the fourth law we are going to talk about is law of continuity, or many a times it is called law of good continuation. So, you call it good continuation. So, what it essentially means is that when you have objects or forms which are intermingled, they are merged with one another, you tend to observe the form which are apparently following a smooth curvature or a smooth what you say, a line or a direction. So, to give you an example, I am drawing one line here and another line here. So, how do you look at this particular object that I have drawn? Are you looking at it as 4 lines, one line here, another line here, another line here and another? So, is it like 1, 2, 3, 4 lines joining at one point? Is it the way you are seeing, or are you seeing it as one line intersecting with another line? So, basically you have one object and two objects. So, this is the correct form that you are looking at, right. So, what it essentially means is, when you have elements merging with each other, and if you find a simplistic line, if you find a simplistic direction, you tend to follow that direction rather than breaking it and looking at the different parts. Like I have shown you the plus sign, you are not looking at 4 different quadrants or 4 different lines and then making a judgment. Rather, you are making a judgment, these are 2 lines which are intersecting. Isn't it amazing power that our mind has, where if you have a complex object, say for example, you have lot of elements connected up together, there is proximity, there is similarity and there is stuff like that working together. Say I make something like this, but still your mind will take a simplistic path connecting all of them together, maybe something like this, and it will start following this. So, this is something our mind does on our behalf, and we start looking at is as a continuity. This is also heavily used by various artists, various visual designers in their design. So, now coming to last but not the least, there are different types of laws and psychology associated. If any of you are interested, you can read that in detail, but we come to the sixth and the last one is the law of common fate. So, law of common fate or law of commonality or common direction, what it says is that if you have different elements and they follow some kind of directional attribute, you tend to club them together. So, in other words, elements having similar direction. So, I have this and this and this. So, if we look at this visual arrangement, there is similarity, as you can see, there is proximity which is playing into picture, but something else is happening here is the common fate or the common direction. So, you tend to bunch these two things together as well, and you tend to bunch these two things together as well, owing to its commonality of direction. So, something following similar fate or similar direction, often you tend to club them together, and that is what you are calling it as law of common fate. So, all of them together come, I mean many a times they all of them play together, many a times some is playing predominantly over the other, but these 6 Gestalt's law are happening all the time, or we are encountering these laws or these principles of perception in our visual communication. Thank you very much for your patient listening.